Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here with Rhonda Morton, and I came across a TED Talk that she did where she talked about being empathy ambassadors, and she's coming from empathy from the creative arts point of view, which really resonates with me. So thanks for being with me here to have a bit of a dialogue about empathy and the nature of empathy.
It's good to be here. Thanks.
So what were you saying? You're kind of curious about how I kind of got involved in this, or what the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy is about? Is that?
Yes, exactly. And what your role is and how it operates in the world.
Yeah. So, I've always been kind of like interested in values. So I kind of look at in kind of exploring values kind of thematically. So I've done like projects like what's the nature of inspiration, or what's the nature of fear. And so when George Bush was in office, conservatives were doing a lot of talk about, they were talking about conservative values. And I thought, well, what are progressive values? And so I started doing a big, research, interviewing people about progressive values, interviewed about 250 people and put all the interviews online. And from those interviews, when I asked people, well, tell me about your most important value, and the people who talked about caring, it's like they'd say, oh, caring is really important to me. And I said, well, tell me about caring. And they'd say, well, my parents, taught me this, and this is what happened. And they'd start crying, because it was so meaningful to them, just this sense of caring for other people and how important it was. I thought, wow, there's a lot of energy kind of around that. And then I kind of read the work of George Lakoff, who talked about progressive values being founded on empathy, and empathy is like the first step to caring. And then Barack Obama actually ran his campaign on empathy, and I put together a compilation of all the talks, all of the speeches where he's talked about empathy, and he's mentioned it 60, 70 times at least. And I said, wow, this is really important value. And then the more I kind of got into it and actually started learning about it, learning kind of processes for deepening empathy, I found this really resonates. This is kind of what I've been about, but I just didn't have really used the vocabulary, empathy.
Right.
And
sure.
So it just, and then I said, well, this is really what I want to do for the rest of my life, is really explore this value. And I think similar to you, you've talked about being an empathy ambassador, and I think, well, how can we build a culture of empathy and compassion? What can we do to actually make that a foundational value in society? And so that kind of brings me, to you, where it's like I really, your talk was all about that. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just share what, maybe an outline of what your talk was about.
Right. The TED Talk theme was "It Connects Us" because I live in upstate New York, in Corning, New York, where there's a river, the Chemung River, that runs through our town and, obviously the surrounding towns. And so we want, the TED Talk folks brought people together around that idea of "It Connects Us." And someone approached me and said, do you want to do a TED Talk? And I said, sure. And the first thing that I thought of in terms of "It Connects Us" is mirror neurons and our bodies. And I'm really interested in the brain-body behavior connection. And that has everything to do with empathy in terms of relating to other people. So when I put the TED Talk together, it was, distilling a lot of ideas from a lot of experiences that I've had in my life, plus some research. And they wanted us to start the talk out with, why is this meaningful to us? And that's when it was like, I suddenly discovered, wow, this has been really important to me for a really long time. And like you, I hadn't really it's been such an ingrained thing that I hadn't really called it forth and named it and articulated the fact that I am an empathy ambassador. But when I was starting to put this talk together, I thought that's what I've been doing. And as similar to you, I feel like it's a big piece of my life's calling at this point. And it comes back to this work with the body and starting with the body. And, you know, I think a lot of us in this society walk around, you know, kind of cut off from the neck down. We think we are our brains. We think we are our thoughts. And meanwhile, there's all this other sort of subterranean stuff going on that if we don't pay attention to it, it comes out sideways. So, you know, I'm a consultant and a coach, and so I work with individuals and groups to foster this, you know, raising your awareness about what's going on in the rest of you besides just your brain. And then, of course, connecting it to the brain, because it's all one thing. It's not like we're disconnected. It's all one thing. And then, like you said, I also come from a performing arts background of, first I started out as a writer, and specifically doing poetry, which has a lot to do with empathy. It has a lot to do with, you know, tuning into how you feel and how you're connected to other people and how we're all connected to each other and to the world and the biosphere and, you know, you name it. So a lot of my training is in improvisation, actually. And improvisation really is founded on empathy. You have to know what's going on in your own body, your own psyche. You have to be present to this exact moment unfolding with others in space and time and create something out of nothing together. And when you really start tuning in and doing that, you realize that you are super, super connected to other people on so many different planes that all you really have to do is start paying attention. And then it all kind of falls into place after that. So for me, I guess to summarize, it's about tuning into the body. And I'm also trained in a discipline called interplay, which is actually founded in Oakland, California, but it's done worldwide. And the founders of Interplay, Phil Porter and Cynthia Winton Henry, talk about being body intellectuals. And what this is based on is body data, body knowledge, and body wisdom. So body data is the data that your body's collecting all the time. Am I cold? Am I hungry? I'm sad. This is coming at me. You know, so there's data going on all the time. And then there's body knowledge, which is the body data patterns and trends that build up over time. So, for instance, if you've been sleeping every day of your life, you know from your body data around that, you know what your sleeping habits are, whether you sleep on your side, your stomach, or the room has to be cold or hot, or, you know, blankies or no blankies kind of thing. And then the real key, though, and this is where empathy comes in and building empathy comes in, is using that body knowledge in what we call body wisdom to change the world, to change your own world and to change the world for other people in a way that just makes it work better for everybody. So that's, you know, a big answer to a general question.
Excuse me. So I guess one question I would have is, like, how would you kind of define empathy? I mean, I have a kind of a model for it. So I'd kind of like to hear what your model for it is, and then maybe share yours and kind of talk about that.
Sure. And I'm not sure I've ever really thought of it as a model, so this will be kind of improvised. But I guess for me, my theory, if you will, or my belief system, my core beliefs, let's put it that way, my core beliefs around empathy are that we are all empathetic. We are born that way. We can be taught to be more empathetic or less empathetic. Our experiences can shape that empathy, but it's kind of like energy. You can't create it, you can't destroy it. It just is there. It can take different forms. It definitely has to do with the connection that exists between and among us in terms of being, humanity, all of humanity. But I don't think it stops there. I think we are absolutely connected through empathy through all living creatures, this planet and beyond. I think it's something, again, that can't be destroyed. It can't be created. It just exists. And it's our job to call attention to it, to pay attention to it. And by doing that, like anything else, we can foster it and nurture it and develop it in ourselves and in other people.
Well, I've been reading a lot about empathy, looking what the academics are saying, the scientists, and there's there's talk out there by the scientists. They'll talk about emotional empathy, which is kind of like kind of the mirror neuron based empathy, and then kind of a perspective taking empathy, and then some other communities will talk about self-empathy, and then other ones about about empathic action. So there's this, as I've looked at this, and even the academics mention it, that there's kind of like disagreement, among them even about what the word empathy means. And so it's kind of like an evolving kind of a term and concept and articulation. But what I've kind of come up with is kind of the first step of empathy being self-empathy, which is kind of, and I really loved I think the term you used was body knowledge. So it's really self-empathy is about having that body knowledge. It's about mindfulness, kind of feeling what's going on, and maybe sensory awareness, this whole sensory awareness community of just being aware of what's going on, what are the feelings that are going on inside yourself. And as we have a deeper sense of that, then the next part is the kind of mirrored empathy, which is also called emotional or affective empathy, by the academics, which is that as you're shaking your head, and smiling, that the more aware I am of my own feelings, the more I can feel through mirror neurons, kind of what's going on for you and where you are, and I feel your sense of acknowledgement and level of interest and sense of clarity or what have you around what I'm talking about. And then there seems to be another component of empathy, which is referred to as cognitive empathy or perspective taking, or it seems to be maybe even imaginative empathy. It's like being able to imagine yourself in another person's point of view. And I think that acting is very much about that. It's like, oh, if I'm this person and I'm taking on that role from their point of view, how would I be? And then there seems to be a fourth component, which is empathic action, which is once you see the other person, feel the other person, is what's kind of the response that we have. And one of the definitions I really like about empathic action is that it's when the blocks to action are removed that don't impede. So like when you're working together with someone, sometimes like you're just not working together well. There's some kind of a frustration there. And I guess it could be in acting too. There's like a stress. And it's really, that is caused by a lack of a deeper empathic connection. And you see that in groups sometimes. You got to kind of go back and reconnect, find what that block is. Somebody's not really feeling heard or something. So that's kind of like this I'm still kind of working on this model, and that's why I'm kind of throwing it out to get kind of your feedback on it, and just see how that resonates for you.
That totally resonates with me on all those levels. And to add to it, I mean, one of the other things that I do when I'm working with individuals or groups, I have this tool called the Phoebe. It's Focus Energy Balance Indicator, and it was developed by a woman named Jenny Whitelaw. She took basically energy patterns in our bodies that exist, like the way that our muscles work and the way that our neurons fire and how our nervous system works. And based on that, came up with 4 types, so driver, organizer, collaborator, and visionary. To make a long story short, it's a shorthand, or it's a lens for looking at how we behave ourselves and then how we interact with other people. And what I love about it is that it's so simple. There are 4 types, it's like really, and they're words we understand, and we get it. When I start explaining it, people are like, oh yeah, I'm a driver organizer, or, oh, that's why I can never go shopping with my daughter. She's a visionary and I'm a driver. I just want to get it done. And she wants to touch everything, so there are those kinds of things that open up your awareness that there are other ways to be in the world, so I think we tend to, and if we don't think about it, if we don't bring awareness to it, we sort of think, well, everybody thinks the way I think, or everyone does stuff the way I do, or feels things I feel. And then when you really start delving into that, you realize that no, people can be very different. Even people who have been raised by the same parents, or who, have basically had the same socioeconomic background, can be very different. So then you add in really different cultures, really different socioeconomic backgrounds, just different life experiences. And then you see that we're not by any stretch of the imagination the same. We don't operate the same. We don't think the same, feel the same. So once you have that awareness and you can start looking at life through that kind of lens, it's like there's a easiness that comes from it. Like just knowing that drops some of the frustration. It drops some of the resisting what is. That's a phrase that Mark Lesser talks about in his book Less. Resisting what is takes so much energy. So if you could just stop doing that, then you free up all of that wasted energy to really deal with what's in front of you, what is, to stop resisting it and respond to it and work with it. And I find that when I introduce these really easy, simple concepts of there are at least 4 different ways to approach the world, and it tunes up through your whole body. It starts in your body, goes through your emotions, your intellect, even your spiritual, your sense of the divine. It's tuned like a radio station to these different energy patterns. We just are born with these preferences. So when people get that and they have this language to talk about it, it's like grease. It just makes things go smoother, and you can forgive that someone does something differently, because you can stop taking it personally. Mm-hmm. You're not doing it to make me angry or frustrate me or, stymie me in any way. That's just really, truly the way you work in the world, And it can be, I've seen lights go off, like people little light bulbs appear above their heads, like, oh, yeah, okay, sure, I get it. And yeah, like you said, suddenly things start moving and shifting and working again. It's like log jams that just free up and the flow starts back in, And one of the other ways that I work with people to bring that about, so you're working, right? You're task oriented or whatever, and you're really focused on, a little focuser trying to figure something out, and you're banging your head against that. And you're banging your head against other people banging their heads against that. And really, lots of times, what you need to do is just lift up off of that and expand out into this sort of visionary, wide open, lots of different perspectives kind of viewpoint, and go about it indirectly. So then you start asking people to talk about their childhoods, or talk about their vacations, or talk about, you know, why they chose the career they chose, or, you know, the best boss they ever had or the worst one. And you start getting, again, some connections that have nothing to do with this task you've been banging up against. And once you've got some connective tissue working on this sort of indirect plane, it makes it easier to go back in and, okay, now let's go back to this task we're working on. Because you have, again, it's like connective tissue or grease or something that makes it flow. It just makes it easier to understand and be more expansive and generous. I mean, generosity, I think, has a lot to do with empathy. You know, you can be you, I can be me, and we can be together as us in the world.
So it sounds like you talked about awareness. So it's like, it's that quality of empathy. Is there something about opening awareness to kind of more, like you're saying, to your childhood, to this? And so the awareness kind of opens, and maybe the task you are working on, then maybe you have more resources for creatively addressing those, something like that. Maybe.
Right, right, absolutely. I mean, in the Phoebe parlance, if you will, we talk about the driver being single point of focus. So you're, you know, focused down one like the barrel of a gun, if you will. But what happens is, by being a single point of focus, you're missing all these other points of view, you know. So there's something about opening up and going into this peripheral vision. I mean, just think about it. So many times everybody's had the experience of, you know, they're trying to solve a problem and they give up, you know, they just can't do it. They walk away from their desk. Or even if they just look up and look out a window, and suddenly, you know, they open their visionary, they open up their actual brain to seeing something else, and the idea, the solution will come out of what seems like nowhere, you know. Or you're taking a shower, you know, or you're driving in the car, you've gone for a walk, and you're getting that walk thing, you know, you're getting the neurons firing back and forth across the hemispheres of your brain, and you're super oxygenated, and, you know, all that good brain body stuff is happening. And suddenly a great solution pops into your brain that you would never, ever have come up with if you just stayed in this really narrow field of focus. So I think the same thing happens, you know, that happens individually, but it happens in groups as well. You know, you get all gnarled up in, we got to get rid of this problem, when if you just open up and walk away from it and go around to a different side of it, you see it in a different way. Which reminds me, I do this great thing with, I started out mostly doing it with little kids, but then I realized you can do it with anybody. It's called, what do I call it? Something to do with making a shape chain. So you get one kid to go out there and strike a pose, and then you get another kid to go and connect in, you know, some way, touching fingers, touching toes, elbow to a head, whatever. You know, they start giggling. It's lots of fun. But they make this little shape chain. And then we, as a group, the rest of us who are observing this, we say, what's going on? Like, if you came across this in a magic forest and, you know, somebody had cast a spell and they had frozen this way, what had been happening right before they got frozen? And, you know, you can get 10 different ideas for what was going on. And the learning there is, it depends on your point of view. You know, if you're looking at the shape chain from over there, you might see a facial expression that I don't see from over here on this side, that tells you a whole different story about what's going on. So getting all those different points of view and backing up, and letting your imagination work, that's a part of empathy too. Like you were saying, the what if, and put yourself in that person's place. What could have made, your best friend not talk to you when you got on the school bus? That's another way that I teach this idea of empathy. Your best friend snubs you, and suddenly you're mad at that person. But what are some of the reasons? And you've let a group of 30 kids in a classroom brainstorm that, and they could come up with 30 different reasons why that kid snubbed the other kid. And suddenly, it could be because their mother is ill and they're worried about her, or they're hungry because they didn't get breakfast that morning, or they have a stomach ache, or they just didn't hear you because they had earbuds in, or like there's so many different reasons why that person could have acted that way. And that's the beginning of empathy, of understanding that people feel different things for different reasons. And that's something that's easy to teach through the arts and through the body.
Well, that's my sense too, is that the arts are one of the best ways of teaching empathy. So I think, and it's why it's such a shame that that's what's kind of cut in school budgets and all that. And just to have all these processes through the arts that can be used to really deepen empathy, because that's kind of looking at how do we build a culture of empathy. How can we actually consciously make it a national, international, cultural priority? Do we need to shift the society to bring empathy as one of the core values? And I think the arts is like probably one of the best approaches, and I feel it actually in the dialogue with you. This is like one of the funnest dialogues I've had, because I interview a lot of academics and all that. And it's like I feel like a real resonance when I'm talking to you as an artist, because I can really feel the essences of what you're talking about. So I'm kind of excited about this.
Yeah. Certainly, I'm not sure that I was necessarily taught empathy actively in my household, or in my growing up family or whatever. But one thing that I did constantly as a child was read. It was my go-to activity, And I have read as an adult that novels and fiction is definitely one of the ways that, even as a society or as a culture, around the world, once the novel became available, historically, empathy levels rose after that, because people could put themselves in the protagonist's point of view, and just got that sense of there are lots of different people living lots of different lives out there. So definitely, just literature as an art form is essential to building empathy. But then in terms of what I do, like I said, as an improviser, I couldn't do what I do if I didn't know how to listen with my whole body, with my whole being. Like one of my favorite improvisational forms is to stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder with two other people. So there's a group of three, and this was taught to me by Rhiannon. She's a great vocalist and improviser, and she. It's called a three-face front. Obviously, you're just facing front. So you're not making eye contact with the people on either side of you. And you are creating a vocal soundscape together. And you don't have anything except for what you can hear. But as I've done, hundreds, probably thousands at this point, of three-face fronts in my life, I realized that it's not my ears that I'm listening with. It's my whole being, and I am connected to those other two people in almost what some people might think of as otherworldly kind of way. I mean, what we are able to create that looks so planned and choreographed, and wait a minute, you must have practiced that. You know, we used to get that all the time in our after our performances, like, well, how much of that were you actually creating in the moment and improvising, and how much of it was planned? And people were just shocked that no, everything was created in the moment. There was no plan, there was no anything. You just go out there and make it happen. But that's because we're really super developed as empathetic people. And then when you work with the same, I work with an ensemble, so we've been improvising together for years now. And when you do that, you develop that much more empathy, because you know what's going on in their lives. You know who they are and what their background is, and where they're going to be afraid and where they're going to be brave, and you know what you can expect from them, and you know they'll catch you if you fall, you know, that sort of thing. It's just incredible what's available when you have committed and have a lot of intention around having that empathy with other people. So, you know, my life practice truly is I don't really claim this all the time, but it's really about world peace. It's really about, that's been my dream since I was, since I can remember. I have always wanted world peace. So this is sort of my practice in the world for contributing to that and to, manifesting it, at least in my circles and in my areas of influence.
So it sounds like peace is kind of the underlying value that's really important to you. Would you say it's like your most important value? Or?
Yeah, I think it would have to be. I mean, it's certainly one of my oldest values, one of the ones that I know even as a child I identified with. My dad was in the Navy and had to go to Vietnam when I was 5. So I was shaped by, sort of the war machine, if you will. And, ever since I can remember, when I blow out my birthday candles, I wish for world peace, like that. Even when I was a child, I did that. So, yeah, and I guess, and maybe as I've gotten older, I don't know if peace would necessarily be it now, would be my most important value, as much as awareness is. Because I think awareness, if you increase awareness, peace is one of the outcomes. A saved environment is one of the outcomes, better relationships, higher functioning families, governments that, are for the people and not for profits. All of those things are fallout from more awareness. So probably awareness is what it is at this point in my life.
Well, when you talked about peace, what I recalled was a quote by Johann Galtung, who is, he's one of the founders of these peace and conflict study programs, and all the a lot of the universities have those now. And he's Norwegian, and he was kind of instrumental in kind of getting those launched. And he has a quote that I use a lot, is that peace is resolving conflict with empathy, non-violence, and creativity, and it's a never-ending process.
That's perfect. Yeah, that like sums up my work.
I just love that quote, because it's the part about the peace, like you had mentioned, you'd been kind of a peace activist, and that I find in the peace movement that's kind of gotten lost is the empathy part of that equation. That it tends to be, we're going to get peace by judging you and telling you how bad you are. And you had mentioned that in your TED Talk about that. It really burns people out when you're in that constant conflict.
Absolutely.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah. No. All those Bush years, I just did myself in, fighting, hating the haters, like, whoa, wait, there's something wrong here. And even now, like, especially now as we enter, these last few months before the election, and the rhetoric that starts boiling up, it's so us and them and us and them and black and white and good and bad, and it's just even the emails that I've been getting, it's becoming information overload, because I see through it and I say, wait a minute, no one's building bridges. Wait, we have way more in common than we are, than we're talking about here. We're only talking about where, we can put a stake in the ground and say, we believe this and they believe that. And I just am so done with that, because like you said, it's exhausting, and it's a waste.
Mm-hmm.
It's a waste of our precious energy. It's a waste of our precious lives to stay, fighting in these two different camps against each other. Better to say, what do I have in common? And another personal example. I had these neighbors. They've now moved away, but these folks who lived across the street from me here, who I would say, we didn't share a lot of the same values. That's sort of the simplest, most fundamental way to capture it. They just lived their lives very differently than I lived my life. So I had opportunities every single day, year after year, to say, now, what do I have in common with them? How can I build a bridge to them? How can I reach out to them? And it went from, calling the cops on them every once in a while to, having one of the women, the younger women who lived in the house, sometimes, she didn't always live there, say to me at some point, when you get through there, because I was working in my garden, when you get through there, I could use some help. And I actually reached out to her and I said, are you serious? Because I would love to help you out with a garden. And, she actually didn't end up moving into this apartment, but, some apartment somewhere where this garden was going to happen. But that was how far we came. I could only call the cops on them to, wait, let's find some common ground. Let's build a garden together. Let's make something good here happen. So it really does start with your life, your decisions, your choices right here. How am I going to treat the people I live with? How am I going to treat the people I live next door to? And then, how am I going to treat the person who checks me out at the grocery, store? And it goes from there. It's not about just, what about those people across the world who are building nuclear bombs and are aimed at us? It really starts much closer in, and that's where you really can have that impact that then ripples out and ripples out and ripples out. And pretty soon the world does change. I absolutely firmly believe that pretty soon your little efforts change the world.
Well, I'm really enjoying this conversation. There's a couple things. One, the lighting. Slowly, the light has kind of started shining on you, and you're like almost like totally. It's kind of very creative. I don't know if you're doing that on purpose, but you're kind of like glowing with kind of being overexposed. And the other, the connection has been a little jerky. So, but beyond that, so. I would have liked to continue longer now, but I think maybe we could have another 1 or 2 calls if you're up for that.
Sure.
To continue this dialogue, because I'm really enjoying it. And there's also other artists that I know. I don't know if you know Ed Hook. He teaches acting in Chicago, I believe, and he's written an article on empathy. And So perhaps you and I could have another dialogue and then maybe invite a couple other
That'd be great.
kind of creative artists to kind of explore this farther.
Sure.
And
sure,
just kind of end it here, but then you know, just schedule another call.
Sure. Yeah.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.